Sup nerds, I'm Tom with Neverboard Gaming, and I'm going to show you how to play Dirty Squad by Binca Games. In Dirty Squad, you and your friends at the table aren't exactly the nicest cops in the world. In fact, you all are the Dirty Squad. And your aim is to be the dirtiest cop in the squad by letting as many killers as you possibly can escape before the time runs out. Here's everything that comes in the box. There are 25 killer cards, which are pretty much the most important cards in the game because, again, you're trying to help as many killers as you possibly can escape before time runs out. There are 35 power cards, which are kind of like special action cards, and they all work a little bit differently, and I'll talk more about that later on. There are also 12 accomplice cards, 12 family member cards, 12 witness cards, 12 victim's friend cards, 12 innocent bystander cards, and 2 character impersonator cards, which are again a little bit special, and I'll talk more about that later. And lastly, there are 70 of these medal tokens. To set up a game of Dirty Squad, you're going to shuffle the entire deck of cards very thoroughly, and then deal out 7 cards and 3 medal tokens to each player. So as you can see here, I've set up for a 3-player game, but regardless of the number of players you have, you're always going to use all of the cards in the deck. After you've dealt out the starting hands, put the remaining cards in a main deck here face down at the center of the table, and then put the remaining medal tokens in the center of the table, which is referred to as the board. The rules do say that the sneakiest player goes first by playing their action before anybody else has a chance to. Now, if you don't like that, or if it becomes like a point of contention on the table or something, you can choose first player however you want. You can roll a die or whatever. It's your game. You can do whatever you want. On your turn, you can perform any one of the following 4 actions. The first action is you can just take 3 medal tokens from the supply, from the board here, and add it to your own personal supply. Simple as that. If you already have 8 or more tokens, you cannot take this action until you have less than 8 tokens. The second action you can take on your turn is you can play a power card from your hand and reap the reward. Basically, you just play it, read what it says, and do that thing. These power cards are all different, and there's kind of a lot of them, so if you have any questions about any of them specifically, there is a reference sheet included that goes over all of them in detail. The third action that you can take on your turn is you can use your medal tokens, and I'll go over that in more detail later on. And finally, the fourth action that you can take on your turn is you can release people from your hand who were brought in for questioning. And now this is the most important aspect of gameplay. This is the action that people are going to be taking the most. It's where all the bluffing happens. This is the crux of the game. How you release people who came in for questioning is very simple. You take either 1 or 2 cards from your hand, place them face down in the middle of the table, and state what type of character cards they are. Remember earlier I went over the different type of character cards that there are, so you can claim that you are releasing accomplices, family members, witnesses, victims' friends, or innocent bystanders. You cannot claim that you're releasing killers, because that's bad. You can't claim that you're releasing character impersonators, because those cards work a little special. And obviously you can't release power cards, they're played in a completely different way. Now once I play these cards face down and I claim what they are, let's say I say these are 2 innocent bystanders. And it's important to note I have to say that they're the same thing. I can't say this is 1 innocent bystander and 1 witness. That's very important. They have to be the exact same. After that, starting with the player to my left, let's say this is Wes, they have the opportunity to call my bluff or to pass. So I'll say, Wesley, do you want to call my bluff? Basically, do you think I'm telling the truth that this really is, what did I say, 2 innocent bystanders? Let's say Wesley says pass, which basically says, yes, I believe you. I really do think that those are 2 innocent bystanders. Then it continues on. Aaron, do you think that this is 2 innocent bystanders? If Aaron says, yep, that's fine, pass, then I take these 2 cards and I put them face down into my release pile. They stay face down until the end of the game. Now, why would Wes or Aaron want to call a bluff? Why would they, not think that I'm telling the truth? Well, because I'm a dirty cop. Now I want to talk about this action a bit more in detail since it is pretty much the main action of the game. It's going to happen a lot and it's pretty important. So I said earlier that people will have a release pile. So every player in front of them in their player area should have a release pile that's face down. These are all of the people who have been successfully released from the questioning room. You'll also have a power cards pile which is face up. These are the cards that you have played previously and they're not to be confused with your release pile. And then also you just have your collection of metal tokens which are considered to be in hand. Even though you can kind of keep them in a pile on the table, they're considered to be in hand. And then of course your hand of 7 cards. When you take this action, you can release either 1 or 2 people from your hand. It's completely up to you. Now, if you release 2 people, it's a bit easier for you to sneak some killers in there. But if you're releasing only 1 person, maybe you look a little bit more innocent to the other people at the table. Maybe they're more inclined to believe you. That's completely up to you. Either way, whether you're releasing 1 or 2 people, you have to claim what type of character card they are. As stated before, I could say that this is 1 family member or that this is 2 family members. Again, I have to claim that they are the same thing. I can't say 1 family member and 1 witness. That's not allowed. After I claim what they are, we'll start with my player to the left. Again, let's say that this is Wesley, and go around the table, and they have the opportunity to either call my bluff or pass. Calling my bluff basically says, we think you're lying, and passing says, we think you're telling the truth. Now, in that previous example, everybody passed. Nobody called my bluff. They all think I'm telling the truth. So I would take those 2 cards, those 2 people that I released for questioning, and put them into my released pile face down. No one saw it. Nothing happened. Hey, everybody believed me. But let's say somebody didn't believe me. Let's say Wes called my bluff. He says, no, Tom, I think you're lying. I think one of those cards is a killer. Well, then my cards get revealed to the whole table, and a couple different things could happen. Now, obviously, one thing that can happen is I could be telling the truth. Hey, look at that. 2 family members. I claimed these were both family members, and they are. So what happens in that case? In the case where a player calls their bluff, thinks you're lying when really you weren't. You were telling the truth. Well, then the player who called my bluff, in this case it was Wesley, they have to give me 3 metal tokens from their personal supply. Hey, thanks, appreciate that. I'm going to put those right over there. Then these family members go face down into my release pile, and that's that. Now let's say I was lying. Wesley called my bluff, and oop, look at that. I was telling truth about this family member, but I was trying to sneak this killer out along with him. So what happens in this instance is I have to take 3 metal tokens from my supply and give it to the player who caught me, in this case Wesley. That doesn't feel so good. But then what happens to these cards is a bit interesting. The killer or killers that were just revealed then go into the play area of the player who caught me, again in this case Wesley, face up. And this is called being in their custody. And I'll talk about this a bit more later. If I have any, non-killer regular cards, those just bounce back into my hand, and that's it. Let's talk about a bit of a special case, right? Let's say Wesley called my bluff, and I was lying, but not really. I mean, I have a family member and a witness. It's not a killer. I claim that they were both family members, and yeah, okay, again, this guy isn't a family member, but he's not a killer. It's not that bad, right? In this case, these cards don't go into my release pile. They get bounced back into my hand, and I owe the player who caught me, in this case Wesley, 2 metal tokens. Not 3, just 2. Not that bad. In any of those cases that I just talked about where a bluff gets called and metal tokens need to exchange hands, but the person who needs to give the tokens doesn't have enough. Like let's say right here in this example, I got caught with this killer, so I need to give Wesley 3 metal tokens, but oops, I only have 2 metal tokens. What you do in that instance is, first of all, I'll give him the 2 that I have, right, which means he still needs 1. I will take 1 from the board, give it to him, and my penalty for trying to get away with this when I didn't even have the metal tokens required if I got caught, I'm going to lose my next turn. And I can't even call anybody else's bluff until after I miss that turn. This would also be true if somebody called my bluff and I was telling the truth and they didn't have enough or any metal tokens to give me. So let's say in this case I was telling the truth and Wesley doesn't even have 1 metal token to give me. Then he would give me all 3 from the board and lose his next turn. After you've taken your action on your turn, you'll draw back up from the main deck until you have 7 cards. So here I only have 5 cards in my hand because I released 2 people. They were probably both killers. So I'll draw back up, so now I have 7 cards. Play then goes to the player to my left. Now let's talk about what it means to have a killer in your custody. So in this example, somebody else was trying to bluff out a killer. Let's say Wesley said, oh, I've got 2 innocent bystanders. I said, I call your bluff. He revealed that he had a killer. He gave me these 3 metal tokens, and then I took the killer into my custody, which is face up in my play area. What this means is this killer is now mine, essentially, but, he's not in my release pile, so it's still possible that some of the other dirty cops at the table can steal him. Right when this killer comes into my custody, I can, and really I should, secure the killer. Securing a killer makes it harder for the other dirty cops at the table to steal the killer, and it's completely free. It doesn't take an action. I can do it right when I take the killer into my custody. And there's 2 different ways that I can secure a killer. I can put up to 4 metal tokens from my supply onto the killer to secure it. So I can put up to, so I can put 4, 3, 2, I can put 0 if I want to, but really it's completely up to me. And actually this works even if I was taking, let's say if I was taking in 2 killers right then into my custody. I can put up to 4 onto these, I can split it up however I want. Again, that's completely up to me. There's also a power card called Safe House, which you can play not as an action, you can play it right then, and it will secure up to 2 killers without using any tokens. If at any point these killers leave the safe house for whatever reason and the safe house isn't guarding any killers at all, well, it's null and void and it just goes into your power card pile. The benefit of the safe house, and actually there's only 1 card in the whole deck, is, well, first of all, I didn't have to use my metal tokens to secure these killers, but also nobody can steal the killers that are protected by the safe house. Well, until, of course, somebody plays a behind bars card on me. And, well, as you can see, these power cards are really specific and can certainly change the rules of the game in really wacky ways. But let's say I don't have a safe house card, and I brought this killer into my custody. How can I bring it into my release pile, and how can people steal it? Well, first of all, if I don't secure this killer, if this killer has 0 tokens on it, any other player, as one of their actions, is they can spend 5 metal tokens from their supply to steal this killer. Remember how I said one of your actions is you can use your metal tokens to your advantage? Well, this is one of those ways. And now actually that's also something I can do on my turn. If it comes around to my turn and nobody's stolen my killer, I can spend 5 tokens from my supply back to the board and put this killer into my release pile. You may be thinking, well, that's fine, Tom, but what if this killer is secured with tokens? So what if right when I bring this killer into my custody, I secure him with, let's say, 2 metal tokens. Now, no other player at the table can steal him simply by paying 5 metal tokens back to the supply, because again, you can only do that if the killer has no tokens. So what happens if this killer is secured with, in this case, 2 tokens? Well, there are 4 cards in the deck, 4 power cards called Custody. And a player can, as their action, play this card to take this killer from my custody into their custody. In order to do that, though, they have to pay me a number of tokens equal to the number of tokens used to secure this killer. So in this case, 2 tokens. And then take that killer into their custody and they can secure them at that time or whatever. Now we are almost ready to play. There's just a few special cases I want to talk about, and the first one is this character impersonator card. Now there are 2 of these in the deck, and the way that this works is they're sort of treated as like a wild card or a joker card, where they kind of copy the card that they're either played with or the card that they are claimed as if they were to be smuggled out by themselves. So let's say, I'm trying to smuggle out, I say I have 2 accomplices right here, and somebody calls me out, says, I think you're bluffing, and I flip them up. Now technically here, I'm not lying because this character impersonator is, for all intents and purposes, an accomplice. So I would get the 3 tokens and all that like normal, but here's what would happen. This right here would not go into my released pile because at the end of the game, every character impersonator that is in your released pile is considered to be a killer. So it's a point for you. It's good for you. So in this case, even though I was called out and I wasn't technically lying, I still don't get that, killer in my release pile. I don't get that extra point. This actually will go into my power cards pile, and it's kind of considered to be a power card at that point. And of course, if I was trying to smuggle this out by itself, right, and I wasn't called out and just went in here, it was a killer. But if I said it was an accomplice by itself and I flipped it up, even though, it's not paired with an accomplice, it would still be considered to be an accomplice, but, still come here just like normal. However, let's say I was trying to release these two cards and someone calls my bluff, and I had a killer and a character impersonator. So if these had both gone unchecked and they went into my release pile, well, I would basically count those as two killers. But if I get called out, I have to give my 3 metal tokens to the player who called my bluff. They take the killer into their custody like normal, but this character impersonator would still then go into my power cards pile. They don't get these 2 cards as killers. A character impersonator would never be in somebody's custody or anything like that. And lastly, in the rare case where for some reason you can't play any of the 7 cards in your hand, let's say you just have a bunch of power cards that don't really work right now or whatever, you can spend your whole turn shuffling your hand back into the main deck and then drawing 7 cards. Again, this would be a very rare instance, but if it ever happens, you have that option. If the main deck ever runs out, here it's the end of my turn, I only have 5 cards, I'm supposed to draw 2, and up the deck's out. Then everybody keeps playing with the cards they have remaining in their hand and just nobody can draw any more cards. Once the deck runs out and people start running lower and lower on cards, if anybody just has a bunch of dead cards in their hand and they really can't play any more of them, the game ends immediately and you go to final scoring. At this point, every player will reveal their released pile and count up how many killers or character impersonators they helped escape throughout the course of the game. So in this case here, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 killers that I helped escape. Now, if you have any killers still remaining in your hand, in this case I do, that will actually negate one of the ones that I helped escape. So really, I'm only ending the game with 5. Whoever has helped the most killers escape wins the game. If there was a tie, whoever has a killer in their custody, which again wasn't counted earlier, whoever has a killer in their custody, whether secured or unsecured, will break that tie and be the winner. If there is still a tie, the player that has the most tokens in hand will break the tie and win the game. If there's still a tie then, well then those players will have a shared victory, because that's pretty rare. Well, that's all the rules for Dirty Squad. If you have any questions, you can go ahead and put those in the comments down below, and I'll get to those as soon as I can. And hey, while you're down there, don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you'll never be bored. I feel like instead of doing finger guns, I could probably just hold this up and go, never be bored. Probably not.